is the mass release of illegal aliens due to a patchwork of court rulings and loopholes in our federal laws and changing tactics from smugglers and transnational organizations.
I want to go into all of this, but I mean, let's just focus on that one issue. 4 times as many people were coming across the border in 2000 as now. So why is that a net?
Back then, 95% could be turned around in a matter of days. As a result of loopholes, active judicial rulings, and increasing sophistication from cartels, the reality is that more than half of people crossing the border are what we call non-impactable. They can't be turned around. And so what you see is sophisticated operations and smugglers will actually push out migrants and children and family units to divert border agents, and then because there's not secured areas with the wall, they'll then cross after the border agents have been diverted to those areas. But at a fundamental level, we could go down to the details, and you know, Chris, I could go down to the details as much as you want to. But the bottom line is this.
Please don't.
But the bottom line is this. You cannot conceive of a nation without a strong, secure border. It is fundamental and essential to the idea of sovereignty and national survival to have control over who enters and doesn't enter the country. And we can get into the statistics. You want to talk about drugs? There's been a huge increase in drug deaths since George W. Bush and Barack Obama were.
I understand that, but 80 to 90% of those drugs don't come across in unfenced areas. They come from ports of entry. Those are your own Customs and Border Patrol numbers.
Which is the reason why we also asked for additional resources at the ports of entry. But Chris,
what you got?
But Chris, the problem with the statement that you're apprehending 80 or 90% of drugs at ports of entry is that's like saying you apprehend those contraband at TSA checkpoints at airports. You apprehend the contraband there because that's where you have the people, that's where you have the screeners. I assure you, if we had people of that same density and screeners of that same density across every single inch and mile of the southern border, you'd have more drugs interdicted in those areas. You don't know what you don't know. You don't catch what you don't catch. But as a matter of national security, you cannot have uncontrolled, unsecured areas of the border where people can pour in undetected.
Okay.
And one more point. I guarantee you this. If Donald Trump had said he's invoking the National Emergency Military Construction Authority to build a security perimeter in Iraq or Afghanistan or around a military installation in Syria, there would not have been one word of objection from Congress. This is defending our own country.
I question whether, in fact, that's the case, but in any case, let's talk about the constitutional aspects of this, because I've talked to you over the years. I know that you are a constitutional conservative, and you believe the Constitution should be interpreted as written, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Here's Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 of the Constitution as written. No money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. Isn't what President Trump wants to do a clear violation of what the founders and what James Madison talked about as giving Congress the power of the purse?
No, because Congress in 1976 passed the National Emergencies Act and gave the president the authority, as a result of that, to invoke a national emergency in many different circumstances, but among them for the use of military construction funds. And that was the point I was making earlier, is that if the president were to say we're going to use military construction funds to say increase the perimeter around a base in Bagram, around a base in Syria, nobody would even say anything about it. We have 4,000 troops on the border right now, and as a result of that mission, they need to secure those areas where they're patrolling.
But let's talk about national emergencies. National emergencies have been declared 59 times since 1976, when the law was passed, the National Emergencies Act. Can you point to a single instance, even one, where the president asked Congress for money, Congress refused to give him that money, and the president then invoked national emergency powers to get the money?
Now, first of all,
can you find out one case?
What you're missing, Chris, is that the national emergencies don't all have the same authorities and the same justification.
But there have been 59. Can you find one case like
this?
that?
This authority specifically refers to the use of military construction funds. Other emergencies, for example, were declared.
I mean, if you want to talk about military constructions, do you know how many times military construction has been invoked as a national emergency? Twice. Once by George H.W. Bush during the middle of the Gulf War, and the second time by George W. Bush right after 9/11. Can you
name one foreign threat in the world today, outside this country's borders, that currently kills more Americans than the threats crossing our southern border?
You know, the joy of this is I'll get to ask you questions.
The answer is no.
Then answer my question. Can you name one case where a president has asked Congress for money, Congress has refused, and the president has then invoked national powers to get the money anyway.
Well, this current situation...
Yes or no, sir?
The current situation pertains specifically to the military construction authority.
Yes, that's Congress asked for money for military construction. Congress said no, and he said...
The meaning of the statute, Chris, is clear on its own terms. If you don't like the statute, or members of Congress don't like the statute, then you will change the answer is no. There hasn't been a single case a long time ago. But the premise of your question is also false because Congress has appropriated money for construction of border barriers consistently. This is part of a national security
But it has
mission.
never done this under a national emergency where
We declared national emergency to promote democracy in Belarus, to promote democracy in Zimbabwe.
But it didn't involve taking money that Congress refused to appropriate.
They didn't refuse to appropriate it. They passed a law specifically saying the president can have this authority. It's in the plain statute. That's a decision that Congress made. And people don't like that, they can address it. But to my point that I made, this would not be even an issue if the president was invoking that statute to support some foreign venture overseas. You and I both know that presidents for years have engaged in one military venture after another, not to mention the fact that we do operations to destroy drug fields in foreign lands in Afghanistan or in Colombia, and we can't even deal with the criminal cartels operating on our border.
Okay,
These criminal organizations
I'm going to move
are destabilizing the Western Hemisphere.
I want to
They
move
fundamental foreign policy issue.
respectfully. Let's talk about the logistics here. If the president gets access to the entire $8 billion he's seeking, how many miles of barrier will he be able to build, and how quickly?
Well, if you look at the authorities we have, both in terms of drug corridor funds, in terms of national emergency funds, in terms of treasury funds, as well as appropriated funds, and other reprogramming authorities that may exist, in combination with the existing
question.
you're looking at hundreds of miles collectively.
And how soon?
Well, you're going to see probably a couple hundred miles in time I would say by the end of the next appropriation cycle, altogether in terms of what we already have underway, what's underway right now, and then what we're going to complete.
So by the end of this year, hundreds of miles.
Next fiscal year, one more after this.
Okay, so by September of 2020, right in the middle of the presidential campaign.
My point is that if you look at what we've already outlaid, we have 120 odd miles that are already under construction or already obligated, plus the additional funds we have that we're going to outlay, you're going to look at a few hundred miles.
Okay. Final question. If both the House and the Senate approve a resolution of disapproval, which they're allowed to, is specifically called for in the National Emergencies Act, and if they pass it in the Senate, it would be with bipartisan support because of Republican control. If they pass a resolution of disapproval, will the president veto that, which would be the first veto of his presidency?
Well, obviously the president is going to protect his national emergency declaration, Chris. And I know that we're out of time, but again, I want to make this point. There is no threat.
Yes, he will veto.
He's going to protect his national emergency declaration, guaranteed. But the fact that they're even talking about resolution of disapproval shows you this is a statutory issue and a statutory delegation that Congress made. But again, I want to make this point. This is a deep intellectual problem that's plaguing this city, which is that we've had thousands of Americans die year after year after year because of threats crossing our southern border. We have families and communities that are left unprotected and undefended. We have international narco-terrorist organizations. This is a threat in our country, not overseas, not in Belarus, not in Zimbabwe, not in Afghanistan or Syria or Iraq, but right here. And if the president can't defend this country, then he cannot fulfill his constitutional oath of office.
Stephen, thank you. Thanks for coming in. It's always good and always challenging to talk to you.
Thanks.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss the legal and political battles ahead.